Good morning, everyone. So, yes, my name's Anne Locker, and I'm the Library and Archives Manager here at the IET. Whoops, a bit too far. So, yeah, my talk today is looking at 100 years of women in communications, which is a bit of a lofty goal, given that I've got about 15 minutes. So, in fact, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to ask 3 questions. Firstly, why should we look at the history of women in communications, or indeed engineering and technology more generally? How can we discover some news stories about the women that you might not know about in the early history of radio and comms? And what do we do with this information? What do we do next? So to start with, just to ask a question. So if we think about the early days of radio kind of here in the UK and more widely, are there any names that spring to mind? Any people that come to mind when you think about the history of radio? Any suggestions? Marconi, yep. Any advance on Marconi? Tesla? Lodge? Yep, okay. So we've got 2 out of 3. So yeah, these are some of the names that I probably think of. So we've got Marconi on the left there. We've got Oliver Lodge, who's a rather solemn-looking gentleman. On the right, work of Heinrich Hertz, one of the first people to demonstrate radio signals in the UK. The gentleman in the middle, anybody? Any takers? That's John Ambrose Fleming. Worked with Marconi, developed the diode. What about these people? Any idea who these women are? Hedy Lamarr, excellent. Somebody got Hedy Lamarr on the left there. Patented a system in World War II for something I find very difficult to say, which is spread spectrum signalling. In the middle, so on the right, that's actually Ursula Eason. One of the first women to work as a producer of the BBC. She worked at Children's Hour, started off in Belfast, first developed radio programming for the deaf community, and also took a rather strange French animation, turned it into the Magic Roundabout. And then in the centre we have Caroline Hazlitt, who is the founder of the Electrical Association for Women, of which more later. So, why? Why are we asking these questions? Well, we know there's a skill shortage in engineering and technology, and figures from Engineering UK are in 2023, there were only 15.7% of people working in engineering and technology were women, and that's actually dropped slightly, unfortunately, from 2022, when it was 16.5%. So I'm not an engineer, and I'm not a teacher or a policymaker, but I am an archivist. So when I look at this problem, I think, well, what can I do? And I think, well, let's go back to the archives. Let's go back to the records and find out a little bit more about what was happening. And it's a good time to do so because, as was mentioned, this year, in fact, the 12th of November 2024, marks the centenary of the Electrical Association for Women, which was a rather interesting organisation set up by women for women to encourage women to use electricity in the home. And we'll come back to them shortly when we look at women as consumers. But firstly, if you think about the 1920s, the other thing that was happening was amateur radio. So, again, if you think about an amateur radio enthusiast, you probably think about somebody like Eric McGaw. Now, Eric was known for his work in the Second World War. He developed the first practical cavity magnetron at GEC, after being invented in Birmingham by Randall and Boot. But in the 1920s, he was a teenager in Belfast, and he had his 5 minutes of fame because he was able to pick up a long-distance transmission, first from the United States and then from New Zealand. And here are some press cuttings that we have in the archives from a collection we have on Eric McGaw. If you look a bit more carefully into Eric's collection, you can see something interesting. Not all these radio amateur enthusiasts were men. So we do have QSL cards. So QSL cards were exchanged by radio amateurs. It stands for that I can confirm that I've received your signal. So if you'd received somebody's signal, or if you'd had a two-way exchange of signals, you could post a little postcard called a QSL card to record that, and it would record the date and the time. And there's a great collection of QSL cards in Eric McGraw's collection. We've actually got some on display today. And this one is from Barbara Dunn, and she is based at Ingatstone in Essex, and she was able to exchange signals with Eric back in 1929. So women were working as amateurs, but they were also working in the early history of broadcasting. So luckily, a lot of the work has already been done on this subject. So Kate Murphy published her book on the history of women at the BBC back in 2016, based on her work at Goldsmiths, her PhD research, but also her career as a producer at Woman's Hour. And Kate makes a point that the BBC were actually employing women right from the beginning. They were there on the payroll, and rather unusually, they also employed married women. So in the 1920s and 1930s, and right up to the 1960s, if you were a woman and you had a job and you got married, you had to leave your job. That was a marriage bar. And that was true for across the civil service, across most public companies. But the BBC would actually let you stay on if you got married. So we have people like Hilda Matheson, the first producer to work at the BBC. So if I can just, here we are, there she is here. We have Isa Benny, who was the first woman producer to work on the Today programme. And we have Janet Quigley, who developed the Today programme and Women's Hour at the BBC. And if you want to find out more, then I highly recommend Kate's book. So we have women working as amateurs, we have women working in the industry, but we also have women as consumers, and that's where the Electrical Association for Women comes in. So the Electrical Association for Women was a group of women engineers and women's organisations that had a really radical idea that if you want women to use electricity in the home, you might actually ask them what they need. So this came as a bit of a surprise to the electrical industry, but they soon came on board, and they produced educational material and also a journal, which was published from 1926, called The Electrical Age for Women. And to start with, it was very much about the aesthetics of radio in the home. So we said, well, these women have got like washing machines and vacuum cleaners, so they've got a bit more spare time. So they might want to listen to the radio, but they don't want a radio that doesn't look nice. So this is from 1926. It's an article by the chief editor of The Electrician, and it's all about if you want radio in the home, it has to look the part. It has to fit in with your home decor. You've got to have nice cabinets. They talk about kind of technical innovations, like you could have microphones that are hidden in picture frames, so they're not obvious. And this is a quote from that article. It says, "From an object which was only admitted to the drawing room on sufferance, and even then had to be hidden behind furniture or pushed into a corner when visitors were about, the wireless receiving set has developed into a neat and sometimes decorative article." But the EAW wasn't just about women as kind of passive consumers. They wanted women to be educated and they wanted women to be active. So they encouraged them to learn things like how to wire a plug, how to change a fuse. And so the articles soon became a little bit more technical. So there's articles about new battery technology, about the development of beam transmission systems, and also about radio production. And this is a great one I found from 1927. And this is on what they call sound scenery. So this is very early sound effects on the radio. And what they're trying to do here is they've got a technical problem. They need to reproduce the sound of a steam train. And so what they've done is they've got some really obvious things. So they've got a train bell, and they've got a gentleman to ring it. There he is there. They've got a train whistle, and they've got somebody to toot it. But they had to work out how to reproduce the sound of the train tracks. That I know what we'll do roller skates. So they took a pair of roller skates on some metal tracks and kind of push them back and forward to make the sound of the train going along the tracks. And they said you need 6 people. So you need somebody for roller skates, somebody for a bell, somebody for a whistle. They've got somebody rattling windows. They've got somebody making some sound of kind of wooden sounds pushing together, and they've got somebody to mix the sound at the end of the day. So it's a little bit of whistle-stop tour, but it shows you the beauty of the archives is that when we think about the history of radio, then historians have gone back to the historical record, but they've taken quite a partial view. They've picked the things that they're interested in, they've picked the things that fit in with their narratives. So that means we can actually go back to the collections today and actually, with a new lens, and look at different things, look at new people, look at where women were actually appearing. Because women didn't just magically become engineers or interested in engineering in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s or the 2000s. They've always been there. They've always been on the payroll, they've always been working there, they've always been broadcasting, they've always been, appearing in newspapers. It's just we didn't really talk about them. Whereas now we can go back to the records and talk about some of those women. So what next? Good news is that this is actually one of the films that the EAW produced called Miss T. It was produced in the Second World War, and the idea was that if you were good and ate your vegetables, you could have an interesting career as a lamp tester. I'm not quite sure if that message kind of really goes through. But if you're interested in doing more, there's a lot of ways of getting involved. And the main thing is to get curious. Talk to the people you work with, especially those who've perhaps been working in the industry for a long time. Ask them what it was like. Ask them about the people who were there, who was popping up, what were they doing. You can get involved with things like we have an annual Wikipedia event for looking at women in engineering. So you can get involved with organisations like WISE, Women's Engineering Society have started a new project this year looking at encouraging women engineers to get involved in public engagement work. So there's a lot that you can do. So, and if you'd like to find out more, we have a display of the archived material down in the Maxwell, or you can come and talk to me afterwards. So thank you very much.
Just wondering whether anyone has any questions for Anne about that remarkable presentation. Thanks for that. We've got just a little time for questions. Any questions for Anne on this particular topic? I loved your graphics. I just love that bold design. If we have anything personally, we open some cardboard boxes in the loft from distant relations, whatever, and we have stuff that we think is relevant. What do we do with it?
Just get in touch. I mean, in fact, this year, because we've been talking about the AW Centenary, we've actually had people getting in touch saying, yeah, my granny did the certificate for home workers, or we had to talk for Julia King, who's the head of one of the UK's climate change committees, and she remembers growing up with, she opened kitchen cabinets and it'd be the EAW kind of thing on, how to fix your boiler, pasted up inside the cabinet. So yeah, anything that you come across that you think we might be interested in, very, very keen to find out more.
And you touched on it right at the end there, but for us gaining access to see this, what's the best route?
So, yeah, get in touch, come talk to us, find us, just Google IT Archives, you can find us that way. So all the collections are open to the public by appointment. We've also got a lot on our website, and we've got an archives blog with a lot of articles on as well. So, so just get in touch to find out more.
And just finally, what sort of future research are you working on now?
So we'll be doing more on the history of the Electrical Association for Women and more on the history of women in engineering, because we've got some fantastic collections on that subject. So we'll be doing that. But also next year marks the centenary. There's lots of centenaries when you work in archives. And it's the centenary of the foundation of the Institution of Electronic and Radio Engineers. So if anybody knows anything about the history of the IERE, which joined with the IET in 1988, or perhaps was a member of the IERE before we joined with the IET, again, we'd love to get in touch and find out more.
And thank you very much indeed. Anne Locker.